James sat slouched on the couch, his eyes glued to his phone. A low hum of tension filled the air as Sarah moved about the tiny kitchen, her swollen belly bumping into counters as she struggled to prepare dinner. She glanced over at him, her exhaustion evident in her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes. "Do you even notice me anymore?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. James didn't look up. "What are you talking about?" "I'm here, aren't I?" "Physically, yes," Sarah muttered. "But mentally, emotionally, you're always somewhere else." "The baby is due in a few weeks, James. I can't do this alone." He sighed dramatically, tossing his phone onto the cushion beside him. "I'm not abandoning you, Sarah. I just need to unwind every now and then. Do you know how stressful it is working all day?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Stressful? Try being pregnant, cooking, cleaning, and worrying about whether your husband will come home sober or at all." James stood abruptly, slipping on his jacket. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "I'm just going out for a bit. I'll be back later." Her face crumpled, but she said nothing. She knew better than to fight him when his mind was set. The nightclub was alive with flashing lights, pounding bass, and the kind of carefree energy James craved. Here, he wasn't the man with a pregnant wife or the guy whose life was about to change forever. He was just James, charming, free, and untethered. He leaned against the bar, drink in hand, as a group of women gathered around him. One of them, a petite blonde with a dazzling smile, tilted her head flirtatiously. "You're different," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "You seem fun. Not like the usual guys around here." James smirked, taking a long sip of his whiskey. "I like to live in the moment. Life's too short to be tied down." Her laughter was light and intoxicating, feeding the ego that had been starving at home. For a few hours, he forgot about Sarah, the baby, and the weight of responsibility he was so desperate to avoid. Back at the apartment, Sarah sat alone on the couch, her hands resting protectively on her belly. The clock ticked mockingly, each passing hour a reminder that James had chosen the nightlife over her once again. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd held her close the night they found out she was pregnant and whispered promises of forever. That man seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by someone she barely recognized. A sudden, sharp pain ripped through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She doubled over, clutching her belly. "No, not now," she whispered. "It's too early." But the pain didn't stop. Panic set in as she realized the baby was coming. James stumbled into the apartment just as the first rays of sunlight pierced the curtains. He kicked off his shoes and froze. The apartment was eerily quiet. On the coffee table was a note, written in Sarah's familiar handwriting. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He stood there, staring at the note, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. He grabbed his keys and rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding. When he arrived, he found Sarah in a sterile white room, cradling a tiny, fragile baby girl. Her face was pale, her hair plastered to her forehead, but her eyes were fierce as they met his. "You missed it," she said simply. James swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sarah, Don't," she snapped. "I begged you to stay, James. I needed you, and you left me. Do you know what it feels like to go through this alone? To bring a child into the world while wondering if her father even cares." He looked at the baby in her arms, a perfect mix of them both. The sight filled him with a mix of awe and guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll do better. I'll be here. I'll change." Sarah shook her head, her expression unreadable. "You don't get to say that now. I've heard it all before. Prove it. But don't expect me to wait around forever." The drive home was silent and suffocating. James sat alone in his car outside the apartment, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him, the man who had traded the love of his wife and the miracle of his child for fleeting thrills and shallow validation. As the sun rose higher, he made a vow to himself. He would fight to earn back Sarah's trust, to be the father his daughter deserved. But deep down, he feared it might already be too late. In the end, James realized that freedom wasn't found in neon lights and crowded dance floors. It was in the quiet moments of love and family, the very moments he'd let slip through his fingers. And whether he could reclaim them or not would depend on the choices he made from that day forward.